There is an irony in Oprah Winfrey's story that hurts too much to be coincidence. The girl who was told she was too poor, too black, too broken to matter became the woman the entire world trusted with its most private pain. The child who was shuttled between relatives like an inconvenience, who wore potato sacks to school because there was nothing else, who learned to make herself invisible to survive, grew into the most visible woman in television history. The teenager who was abused, dismissed, and discarded discovered that her voice, the voice she had been punished for using, was worth more than anyone who ever silenced her could have imagined. The same woman who would later sit across from Michael Jackson in the most watched interview in television history, asking questions the entire world wanted answered, had spent her childhood learning that her own questions, her own pain, her own voice didn't matter to anyone. And then life, as it always does with people who build their entire identity on one extraordinary strength, began doing what life does. It began testing whether the power was real, or just a beautiful performance of survival. How does a girl born in absolute poverty, without protection or privilege, become the first black female billionaire in American history? What was she carrying behind those eyes that always seemed to see directly through you and into something deeper? What happens when the woman who taught millions to heal their wounds, who interviewed everyone from the Casio family to Wade Robson about trauma and truth, discovers that she has been quietly bleeding from her own wounds for decades? To understand all of that, we need to go back to the beginning, to Kosciuszko, Mississippi, to January 29, 1954, and to a girl who learned in the cruelest way possible that the world assigns your value before you are old enough to argue. Kosciuszko, Mississippi in 1954 was not a place that apologized for what it was. It was red clay roads and weathered wood and a sky so wide it made ambition feel small. Oprah Gail Winfrey was born on a winter morning to two people who were never a couple in any real sense. Two young people who made a child and then made separate lives. Her mother, Vernita Lee, was 18 and unmarried. Her father, Vernon Winfrey, was a soldier who would later become a barber, a man of discipline and quiet faith. But he was not there. Not at first. Not in the ways that matter when you are very small and the world is very large. Oprah's earliest years were spent on her grandmother Hattie Mae's farm. There was no electricity in the conventional sense of comfort. No running water. There were pigs and chickens and a grandmother who was fierce and loving in equal measure, but who also believed that children learned through fear as much as through tenderness. There was no luxury, no industry connection, no paved road to anything. But there was a child who felt the world too intensely, who preached to the farm animals at age 3 because she had already discovered that speaking was the only thing that made the noise inside her quiet. When Oprah was 6, her grandmother became ill, and she was sent north to Milwaukee to live with Vernita, the mother who was essentially a stranger. What followed was not a reunion. It was a rearrangement of loneliness. Milwaukee was cold in ways Mississippi had not prepared her for. Cold in temperature, cold in welcome. Vernita was working, struggling, absent in the ways that poverty forces a person to be absent. There were half-siblings. There was crowding. There was no space, physical or emotional, for a little girl who talked too much and felt too much and wanted, desperately, to be seen. And then, beginning when Oprah was 9 years old, a male relative began visiting. What happened during those visits left marks that no camera filter, no philanthropic empire, and no spiritual awakening has ever fully erased. She was sexually abused. Repeatedly. By different men over several years, including a 19-year-old cousin and an uncle. She told no one, because she had already learned the first brutal lesson of her childhood. The people who were supposed to protect her were not reliably present for that task. She would later recall sitting on the back porch steps, staring at the concrete, wondering if anyone would ever believe her if she spoke. Years later, she would say, with a steadiness in her voice that cost her something visible to maintain, "I was 14 and became pregnant, and I thought I would be thrown out, cast away. I thought I was bad, that I was to blame." She carried that pregnancy and lost the infant shortly after birth. She was a child carrying a grief that most adults are not equipped to survive, and she carried it alone, in a body that had already been taught it did not belong to her. At 14, she was sent to live with Vernon in Nashville, the father she barely knew, a man who ran a strict household where books were not optional and curfews were absolute. Some people would have resented it. Oprah, somewhere beneath the damage, recognized it as the first time someone had looked at her life and decided she was worth structuring a future around. It was not warmth, exactly. But it was something rarer. It was expectation. Vernon made her read books and write reports. He made her learn 5 new vocabulary words before dinner. And for a girl who had been treated like an afterthought for 14 years, being expected of felt almost exactly like being loved. At East Nashville High School, Oprah discovered something that would change the trajectory of her entire existence. She could speak, not just talk, but command a room, hold attention, make people feel something they hadn't felt before she opened her mouth. She joined the drama club. She won a speaking contest that earned her a full scholarship to Tennessee State University. And at 17, while still in high school, a local radio station hired her to read the news. The girl who had been silenced by shame for years discovered that her voice, when she finally used it, was worth paying for. By 19, she was the youngest news anchor and the first black female news anchor at Nashville's LAC TV. But Nashville was too small for what was building inside her. In 1976, she moved to Baltimore to co-anchor the evening news at WJZ-TV. And here, for the first time, she failed. She was too emotional for hard news. She cried during tragic stories. She ad-libbed when she was supposed to stick to the script. The station demoted her, a humiliation that felt like confirmation of every cruel thing she'd ever been told about herself. But in that demotion was a redirection. They moved her to a morning talk show called People Are Talking, and the moment Oprah sat down to have real conversations instead of reading teleprompter copy, something extraordinary happened. The wound disappeared. The shame that had made her feel like she needed to hide transformed into the very thing that made her extraordinary. She could talk to anyone about anything because she had survived everything. In 1984, she moved to Chicago to host a struggling morning show called Am Chicago. Within months, it was renamed The Oprah Winfrey Show. On September 8, 1986, it went national. Within a year, it was the highest-rated talk show in television history. Oprah wasn't just interviewing celebrities. She was creating a space where people could confess, heal, and be witnessed. In 1993, her interview with Michael Jackson at Neverland Ranch drew 90 million viewers worldwide, the most watched interview ever. She asked him about his childhood, his pain, his loneliness, and in asking, she was also answering her own questions. The Oprah Winfrey Show ran for 25 years. She became the first black female billionaire. She launched a magazine, a network, a book club that could make unknown authors into bestsellers overnight. Entrepreneurs like Emma Grede would later credit Oprah's model of authentic personal branding as the blueprint for building empire through connection. She ran the Marine Corps Marathon with a time that shocked critics who had only seen her battle with weight publicly. She became a force, but the cost was brutal. 3 failed relationships, a public weight struggle that became a national spectacle, and in 2019, when she sat down with Wade Robson and the subjects of Leaving Neverland for Oprah Winfrey Presents After Neverland, she was confronting something deeper than Michael Jackson's legacy. She was confronting the reality that fame, power, and even the most transformative platform in media history could not erase the scars left by childhood abuse. The same trauma she had carried in silence for decades was the trauma she was now holding space for on the largest stage imaginable. Today, at 71, Oprah Winfrey remains one of the most influential women on earth. But she no longer pretends to have all the answers. She speaks openly about therapy, about the weight she still struggles with, about the little girl from Kosciuszko who sometimes still wonders if she's enough. Her legacy is not perfection. It is the living proof that you can be broken and still build something that heals millions, that your worst wound can become your greatest gift if you are brave enough to stop hiding it. From the girl nobody wanted to the woman the entire world turned to, her story is a reminder that survival is not about erasing the past. It is about transforming it into something that makes the present bearable for someone else still suffering in silence. What lesson do you take from Oprah's story? How many times have you transformed your deepest wound into your greatest strength? Share your reflections below and subscribe for more stories of those who turned pain into power. Because in the end, as Oprah herself taught us through every interview, every confession, every moment she chose honesty over image, your story, no matter how broken it began, is the only one that can save the person who needs to hear it most.